My name is Nico Lachelle, and I did a book report on the book Survivor by Chuck Palahniuk. And I think he chose the name Survivor because the main character, his name is Tender, and he survived like a cult kind of. So in the beginning of the book, it pretty much starts off with the end of the book in a way, and it actually has like reverse chapters, so it starts at chapter 46 and then it goes down to chapter 1. So it starts at the end of his life where he's in a kamikaze plane descending down, and it's slowly running out of fuel, and he's the last person on there. So the plane is crashing down, and he's sitting there on the black box telling his life story pretty much. So then he gets into his life story, and pretty much so he was born and raised in a Creedish cult. The cult taught like that always help others, like your own needs are super irrelevant, and it pretty much says like it was like all the way up until they were 18, and only the first son could ever have kids, and then the rest couldn't have kids. So his brother, who was actually his twin brother named Adam, was only about 3 minutes older than him, and he was the only one who was able to have kids out of the many kids that his father had, and his name was Adam, and then the rest of the sons were all named Tender, and their last name was Branson, which was the only unique thing about them. And it pretty much, their whole goal was to just help others and never worry about themselves. But once they turned 18, they were allowed to leave the cult if they liked. So Tender Branson, the main character, he decides to leave the cult, and once the Creedish leave the cult, they normally go into specific careers like cleaning, so just working for other people, because that's kind of their whole thing, is they just work for other people. So he's working for other people, and he's super good at cleaning, but he used to get these calls where like it was like suicide, like it was a misprint, and they put his phone number as suicide prevention hotline, and so like people on the verge of suicide would call his number, and instead of helping them at all, he would just tell them to end their life. So they would call and he would say that, and he ended up kind of liking it in a weird way, so he started putting his own stickers around, and people would call him and he would just be very like abrupt to them, and he said it felt like he was their god, and he had power and control was one thing he never really had, so it gave him a sense of control. And then he meets a girl named Fertility, and they meet in this in this like kind of graveyard, and it's like her brother's grave, who was one of the phone callers, but she doesn't know that he was the one who told him to do that, but he only went there because he wanted to see if he really did it. And so he meets this girl there, and he ends up liking her and stuff, and she ends up calling the hotline too, but he recognizes her voice, so he actually talks to her and tells her not to do it. But later on, he meets his brother Adam again outside of the cult, because he actually left even though he was supposed to stay and be the only one kind of like reproducing there. And so he leaves, and pretty much what happens next. Oh, that's right. So people like hear about his story because he's one of the okay, I missed a part. So basically what happened to the rest of the Creedish people is they all had like a day where they were gonna all commit suicide and ascend and like send themselves to heaven. So the rest of them who stayed did that, but Tender Branson, he didn't know about this yet, and so he he was left behind in this, and he feels super like left out, and so his life, according to the Creedish culture, is pointless at this point. So he's pretty like depressed. He's just like cleaning houses and like doing the phone call things. And so he meets this girl, and she brings a little bit of meaning to his life, but she doesn't like him, and he knows that because when he calls or when she calls him, she kind of talks about him, and like because he was asking, um oh, did your brother have any visitors, because he wanted to know what she thought about him, and she was like, yeah, one weird guy. So she thinks he's weird and like unattractive, so this really like bums him out, and he's pretty much like over life at this point. And so he ends up getting famous in a way because people find out he's the last Creedish survivor. So he gets on all these TV shows, and he gets a manager named Fran, and he's getting really rich and famous at this point, and he's getting phone calls still, and a bunch of things. And he obviously doesn't he doesn't like he doesn't continue to clean houses. And Adam, his brother, who he reunited with in a way, he ends up like talking to Fertility, who can actually like who has dreams about the future, and starts and can like predict when things are gonna happen. Like Fertility and them, she tells them that this bakery is gonna explode, and then they go and they watch the bakery explode. So she has all these like dreams about like the future, so she can pretty much predict the future. And so could her brother, which is the reason why he killed himself, because it was just like too much for him. And so Adam also claims he kind of like knows the future, and he like knows like what people's purposes are, and that's just kind of him like lying in a way, and just like being a little bit manipulative and kind of bending the truth, because he obviously thinks everybody's purpose is just to like live in the Creedish way. So so she thinks that they can connect on that, so they kind of start being in a relationship. But eventually Fertility ends her life because the visions and stuff are too much, and she's like pregnant, and she doesn't want her kid to like live in a life where her kid knows what's gonna happen, and it's like not fair. And so like before she ends her life though, she told the main character, Tender Branson, that his life is gonna have a extreme abrupt end. And so it kind of leads back to like the beginning of the book. And at this point, he realizes like the fame and the pressure, like even though it's different from his old life, he's still out of control, and his manager, his agent, Fran, is mainly in control at this point. And he meets a girl named Catherine, and Catherine Catherine also ends up ending her life too, and I wasn't very specific on why, but I think it was just like too much for her, like the whole like the fame and everything. And he just kind of wait, I'm trying to remember exactly why. I'm sorry. Anyways, but she does it like off media, because at this point Tender Branson's a very famous, like he's pretty famous now. He's been on a bunch of TV shows, and he meets Catherine and everything, and she like ends her life off media, and it doesn't get that much attention, and not that much, like nobody really cares, weirdly enough. And so Tender Branson kind of realizes like even though he's not living the Creedish way, which had complete control of his life, he's in this new control, like it's kind of like his brother preaches, like it leads to naturalism because his brother says like you like your faith is your fate is your fate, like you're born with your fate, which is similar, funny enough, is similar to Great Gatsby, but his brother kind of preaches like you already have your fate set, and he sees like a big abrupt ending and and Tender Branson's life and his death, I meant. So Tender Branson is realizing that even though he has this new job and he's super rich and famous now, like he's still not in control. So as his last hope of like control, he goes on this plane and he says like, this is the quote, this is the important quote, I have it written down. He says, "We all die. The last thing anyone can ever do is tell their story." So this is him basically finally choosing to have control and tell his story because it's the last thing anybody can do before they die. So that's his version of control. So um, that was one of the questions. I'm gonna read the rest because I don't remember them exactly. Okay, so I do think so. This is a nonfiction book, and the character that grew the most was obviously Tender Branson. You know, he came from being like um, a cult member to like living in the outside world and cleaning it for others to being rich and famous. So he's been here, and then he's like, you know, none of this really even matters in the long run. Like I still don't have control. Like I'm still not necessarily happy. So he tells his life story on like a flying plane that's gonna crash, and like, and I guess like in a way, it was still his fate because all of his like it's really symbolic because all of his old cult members killed themselves, and now he's doing the same thing in a much greater, like bigger way. And then I did my favorite line in the book, and then my favorite, or one thing I would change is I would definitely say I wish the book was a little less dark because it was kind of a difficult read at times, especially if you're not like necessarily in the mood. Like it makes you feel a little weird like listening to all the death, but super interesting book for sure. Um, I think I covered it all. Okay. All right. Cool. Thank you for listening.